Recognizing the member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to speak on this important topic that the member opposite has brought forward today. It is one, I'm sure, that all members of this House can wholeheartedly endorse. We all want to see a more inclusive BC. We all want to create a more equitable society where people are not discriminated against or disadvantaged on the basis of their gender identity. We know that women and gender diverse people have historically been, and in many ways still continue to be, discriminated against in our province. Yet we've made some significant strides over the past century, especially in the last few decades. The year that I was born was the first year that women could have a credit rating on their own without a man. This was needed in order to qualify for loans, a credit card, without a male signatory. We've come a long way in just my lifetime, but we have so much farther to go. Let's start with the first step. Admit we have a problem. It's important to admit and acknowledge the fact that we do not live in a truly equitable, inclusive society, and that women and gender diverse British Columbians need action. Which brings me to my next step, act. To not just talk or promise to make a change, but to make it happen. Something that this NDP government has failed to show us so far because they're very stuck in step one. The members opposite like to style themselves the champions of women and gender diverse people in BC, but their actions have not lived up to their lofty rhetoric. Let's bring up some more facts. The NDP has promised repeatedly to bring in equal pay legislation. Years later, 6 years later, under this NDP government, BC has become one of the last surviving members of a club we do not want to be in. One of 4 remaining provinces without pay equity and transparency legislation in this country. Embarrassing. To make matters worse, we've also the worst gender pay gap in Canada at 18.6%. And what has been done by this government? Nothing. Madam Speaker, as a member of the Select Standing Committee on Finance, we heard from multiple organizations representing women begging for action rather than the lip service that they have received over these past 6 years. My former colleague, the previous member for Surrey South, introduced pay equity legislation 5 times in this House, and this NDP government refused to adopt it every single time. The Premier even went so far as to call this much-needed legislation a political stunt. From a government that professes to care about equality and advancing the rights of women, this behavior is absolutely hypocritical and shameful. Pay equity is not even the only example that we have of this government making a promise to advance equity and failing to follow through. Because we cannot forget that the NDP also promised 6 years ago to make contraception free for all. Free contraception is a matter of fairness. In fact, one person speaking in favor of the policy said, and I quote, "For too long, the cost of contraception has fallen disproportionately on the backs of women, trans, and non-binary people. It's time to make contraception free for all," unquote. It's a sentiment I absolutely agree with. But it might surprise the members in this House, especially the Minister of State for Childcare, because it was her that said it from 2 full years ago. So where is the free contraception British Columbians were counting on this government to deliver? Where is the Minister of State for Childcare, who repeatedly professed the importance of this policy? Where is the action? If it was important then, it should be even more important now. British Columbian women and gender diverse folks are dealing with increased costs of living, having to choose between rent, food, or medications. They have worse living conditions now than back then. And yet year after year, budget after budget, there has been no funding for free contraception. Every turn, the NDP have failed to make good on their promises, and as a result, have failed to make needed progress on the path of having a more inclusive BC, leaving women and gender diverse British Columbians in the dark. Now is the time for action, for tangible steps that make a real difference in the lives of British Columbians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.